3 months after their encounter with the Reapers, the Star Wanderer docked at humanity's largest space station, New Haven. James stood at the viewing deck, watching as ships from a dozen different species came and went. Rose stood beside him, no longer the terrified refugee he'd found in that escape pod. She wore a modified environmental suit designed for her species, the crystal pendant hanging proudly around her neck. "The Council accepted our evidence," James said, holding up his datapad. "The Reapers have been declared enemies of all civilized species. Every fleet in known space is hunting down their remaining ships." Rose nodded, a very human gesture she'd made her own. "Justice," she said, her English now much improved, "but not revenge. My people would want healing, not more destruction." Through their empathic bond, which had grown stronger over time, James felt her mixture of sadness and hope. The Assyri were gone, but their wisdom would live on. "Ambassador Williams is ready to see us," James said, checking the time. "Sure you want to do this?" Rose turned to face him, her violet eyes bright with purpose. "Yes, time to build something new." They walked through the station's diplomatic quarter, passing representatives from various alien species. Many nodded respectfully to Rose. News of her survival and the Reapers' crimes had spread quickly through the galactic community. The human ambassador's office was simple but elegant. Williams, a tall woman with gray hair, greeted them warmly. "The Council has reviewed your proposal," she said, gesturing for them to sit. "It's unprecedented, but these are unprecedented times." Rose sat straight, her natural grace evident even in this formal setting. "My people believed in bringing others together. This sanctuary, it would honor their memory. A safe haven for refugee species," Williams said, pulling up the plans they'd submitted. "Built on the principles of both human protection and Assyri healing, and you two would oversee it." James felt Rose's anxiety spike through their connection. He sent back calming thoughts. "We've worked well together so far," he said. "And there are more people out there like Rose. Survivors who need help." Williams smiled. "The Council agrees. They've approved the funding and location. The sanctuary will be built in neutral space, protected by human ships but governed by principles of peace." Rose's joy radiated through the room so strongly that Williams blinked in surprise. Through their link, James saw flashes of Rose's vision. A place where displaced people could find not just safety, but understanding and community. Later, back on the viewing deck, they watched as construction ships began assembling the sanctuary's first modules. The massive structure would take months to complete, but already other refugee species were requesting asylum. "Thank you," Rose said softly, touching James's arm. Through their connection, he felt the depth of her gratitude, not just for saving her life, but for helping her create something meaningful from her loss. "Partners, remember," James replied with a smile. "Besides, the Star Wanderer was getting lonely with just the two of us." Rose laughed, a sound that still delighted him. She looked out at the stars, her bioluminescence glowing softly in the dim light. "My people had a saying," she said, "from the darkest night come the brightest dawns." She touched her crystal pendant. "Their wisdom lives on, not just in here, but in what we build together." James felt her conviction through their bond. The sanctuary would be more than a refuge. It would be a testament to what different species could achieve together. Human determination combined with Assyri compassion, creating something entirely new. A small ship approached the construction site, carrying the first group of refugees. Rose straightened, ready to welcome them. "Shall we?" she asked, holding out her hand. James took it, feeling the warmth of their connection. "Together," he agreed. As they walked toward the docking bay, both knew that this was just the beginning. The sanctuary would grow, the living monument to hope and survival, proof that even in the darkest corners of space, light could still be found. And at its heart, a human and an Assyri would show the galaxy that the greatest strength comes not from weapons or power, but from understanding, protection, and love. The space station's ancient weapons roared to life, catching the first Reaper ship completely by surprise. Automated defense turrets emerged from hidden compartments, their energy beams slicing through the massive vessel's outer armor. "Direct hit," James shouted, watching the battle unfold on the control room screens. Rose stood beside him, her hands pressed against the console, using her empathic abilities to track their enemies' movements. "More coming," she warned. They, angry now. The remaining 2 Reaper ships took evasive action, their black hulls reflecting the weapons' fire. They returned fire, shaking the entire station with their attacks. "Divert power to Section 5 shields," James commanded, his fingers dancing across the controls. Rose anticipated his needs, routing energy through secondary systems she could sense were still intact. Through their mental link, James felt her exhaustion. Maintaining such deep empathic contact was draining her, but they needed every advantage they could get. "Second ship approaching Maintenance Bay 3, Rose reported, her voice strained. James smiled grimly. Perfect. He activated a sequence of commands, and explosive decompression ripped through the maintenance bay. The Reaper ship was caught in the blast, tumbling end over end into the station's outer hull. "One left," James said, but his victory was short-lived. The final Reaper vessel, larger than the others, launched boarding pods toward the station. Rose staggered, overwhelmed by the hatred emanating from the approaching warriors. "They're coming for me," she whispered. "Like before, like home." James caught her as she swayed. "Hey, look at me." He waited until her violet eyes met his. "This isn't like before. You're not alone this time." Rose steadied herself, drawing strength from his confidence. Through their connection, James felt her fear transform into something stronger. She straightened up, her pale blue skin glowing more intensely. "I have idea," she said. "Dangerous, but might work." She explained through images and emotions rather than words. James's eyes widened as he understood her plan. "That's crazy," he said. Then he grinned. "Let's do it." They could hear the Reapers now, their heavy footsteps echoing through the station's corridors. Rose took up position in the center of the control room, while James worked frantically at the console. The doors burst open. Reaper warriors stormed in, their biomechanical armor making them look more machine than living being. Their weapons locked onto Rose. "Surrender, last Asiri," their leader growled. "Your species ends today." Rose closed her eyes. The air seemed to vibrate around her. "Now," James shouted, slamming his hand down on the controls. The station's artificial gravity reversed suddenly. The Reapers, unprepared, were thrown upward, but Rose and James had magnetized their boots seconds before. Then Rose struck. She threw her empathic powers outward, not with her usual gentle touch, but with all the accumulated grief and rage of her murdered people. The Reapers screamed as their minds were overwhelmed by the emotional assault. James activated the emergency bulkheads, sealing the room. Through the viewport, they watched as the final Reaper ship approached, weapons charging. "Ready for the last part?" he asked. Rose nodded, sweat beading on her forehead from the strain of maintaining her psychic attack. Together, they initiated the station's self-destruct sequence. "Time to go," James said, taking her hand. They ran for the Star Wanderer *, leaving the incapacitated Reapers trapped behind them. The ship's engines were already warming up when they reached it. As they strapped in, the station's warning sirens blared. 30 seconds to core breach, the station's computer announced. The Star Wanderer * shot out of its docking bay just as the Reaper ship moved in for the kill. Behind them, the station's reactor went critical. The explosion lit up space like a new star being born. The Reaper ship, caught in the blast wave, disintegrated. In the Star Wanderer's cockpit, Rose slumped in her seat, exhausted but alive. Through their fading mental connection, James felt her relief, her gratitude, and something else, a feeling of belonging. They had survived. Together, deep within the abandoned space station, James worked frantically to repair the Star Wanderer's damaged shields. Rose stood nearby, holding a light steady as he worked beneath an open panel. "Hand me that wrench," he said, pointing to his toolkit. Rose picked up the correct tool on her first try. She learned quickly by reading his mind during repairs. Through their empathic connection, James felt her anxiety. The Reaper ships were still out there, methodically searching the station's many docking bays and maintenance tunnels. "They're getting closer," Rose said in broken English, her voice trembling. James slid out from under the panel, wiping grease from his hands. "Let them come. This station has defenses they don't know about." Rose touched his arm, sharing a memory. Her people had tried to defend themselves too. The Reapers had simply overwhelmed them with superior numbers and firepower. "We're different," James assured her. "Humans, we're stubborn, and we fight better when protecting someone." A distant explosion rocked the station. Rose stumbled, but James caught her. For a moment, they stood close, her fear mingling with his determination through their mental link. "Why help me?" she asked, both in words and emotions. "Risk death for stranger." James thought about it, letting her feel the truth of his answer. "Because it's right. Because you needed help. Because no one deserves what they did to your people." Tears formed in Rose's violet eyes. She pressed her forehead against his, sharing memories of her life before the Reapers came. He saw beautiful cities, felt the constant warm presence of millions of connected minds, experienced the peace of a society that had evolved beyond violence. In return, he showed her humanity's history, their struggles, their persistence, their endless ability to survive against overwhelming odds. Where her people had sought harmony, humans had been forged in conflict. "You're not alone anymore," James said softly. The station shuddered again, closer this time. Rose pulled back, wiping her eyes. A new emotion radiated from her, determination, mixed with something else. Trust. Hope. She touched the crystal pendant around her neck, then carefully removed it. Through their connection, James understood its importance, not just a cultural archive, but the combined knowledge and experience of generations. "Keep safe," she said, pressing it into his hands. If they. "That's not happening," James interrupted, but he gently tucked the crystal into his pocket. "Come on, I have an idea." They rushed through the station's dark corridors, Rose lighting the way with her natural bioluminescence, a trait of her species he'd only recently discovered. James led them to an old control room he'd spotted during their docking. The console was ancient but still had power. James's fingers flew over the controls, bringing up systems that had lain dormant for decades. "What doing?" Rose asked, watching symbols flash across the screen. James grinned, waking up the station's automated defense grid. "The Reapers think this place is dead. They're in for a surprise." Rose's eyes widened as she understood. Through their link, she shared his excitement, adding her own knowledge of similar systems she'd studied before her world fell. Together, they worked to reactivate the station's weapons. Rose's empathic abilities let her sense where the Reapers were, while James's experience with old technology helped them bypass damaged systems. "Ready?" he asked, his hand hovering over the final activation switch. Rose placed her hand over his. In that moment, their connection deepened. James felt her grief transform into resolve, her fear into strength. She had lost one home to these monsters. She wouldn't lose another. "Ready," she said firmly. They pressed the switch together. Throughout the station, ancient weapon systems hummed to life. The hunter-killers were about to learn what it meant to face humanity's ingenuity combined with Assyri insight. And through it all, their hands remained clasped together, two survivors from vastly different worlds, united against a common enemy. The warning alarm jolted James awake. He rushed to the bridge, his bare feet cold against the metal floor. The main screen flashed red, showing 3 ships dropping out of hyperspace behind them. Rose was already there, her white hair gleaming in the emergency lights. Her face was pale with terror, and waves of fear rolled off her in crushing waves. "Reapers," she said, one of the few words she learned that James wished she hadn't needed to know. The ships were massive, their black hulls seeming to absorb the starlight around them. They resembled ancient predatory fish, all sharp angles and threatening protrusions. The Star Wanderer looked tiny in comparison. "Attention, human vessel," a harsh voice crackled through the comm. "You are harboring a fugitive of the Reaper Empire. Surrender the Asiri female immediately." James glanced at Rose. She stood frozen, gripping the back of his pilot's chair so hard her knuckles had turned white. Images flashed through their empathic connection. Cities burning, people screaming, systematic extermination. "Like hell," James muttered, then hit the comm switch. "This is a registered salvage vessel in neutral space. The person you're referring to is under my protection." A harsh laugh answered him. "Protection? You are nothing. Your species is barely out of its cradle. Surrender her, or we will destroy your ship." James's hands flew over the controls, plotting a course through a nearby asteroid field. The Star Wanderer might be small, but that made it nimble. He'd added some modifications over the years that weren't exactly legal. "Hold on," he told Rose, engaging the engines at full power. The ship lurched forward. Behind them, the Reaper vessels opened fire. Energy beams sliced through space where they'd been moments before. Rose pressed her hands against the viewport, broadcasting a mixture of terror and guilt. "Danger because of me," she projected. "Not your fault," James said, weaving between asteroids. "They're the ones who chose to be murderers." The Reaper ships followed, too large to maneuver effectively through the asteroid field. Their weapons were devastating but needed a clear line of sight. "Your death will be slow, human," the Reaper voice threatened. "We will make the Asiri watch before we finish our work." James switched off the comm. They love hearing themselves talk, don't they? Despite her fear, Rose managed a small smile. She'd learned that humans often used humor in dangerous situations. A blast rocked the ship. Warning lights flashed across the console. "Shield damage," James announced. "We need somewhere to hide. Make repairs." Rose touched his shoulder. Images filled his mind. A massive space station, abandoned long ago. She'd seen it through the viewport during their journey, not understanding its significance until now. "Perfect," James said, understanding her plan. "Good thinking." He altered course, pushing the engines harder. The Star Wanderer shuddered, straining against the acceleration. Behind them, the Reaper ships destroyed asteroids with increasing frustration, trying to clear a path for pursuit. Rose sat in the co-pilot's seat, strapping herself in. Her fear was still present, but now mixed with something else. Determination. She wouldn't let these monsters destroy another life. "We're going to make it," James assured her, though the situation looked grim. Humans are pretty good at beating impossible odds. Through their connection, he felt her trust in him. It made him even more determined to prove worthy of that trust. The space station appeared ahead, a massive structure slowly rotating in the void. Its outer sections were dark and lifeless, but the central core still had power readings. "Hold on tight," James said, diving the Star Wanderer toward a narrow maintenance dock. "This is going to be close." As they disappeared into the station's shadows, the Reaper ships emerged from the asteroid field. Their dark shapes blocked out the stars, weapons charging for another attack. But James had a plan. The station might be abandoned, but that didn't mean it was defenseless. He'd spent years salvaging from places like this. He knew their secrets. Now he just had to survive long enough to use that knowledge. 3 days had passed since James found the alien woman in the escape pod. He sat in the ship's small galley, watching as she carefully examined a cup of warm tea he'd given her. Rose. She'd managed to communicate her name through a combination of gestures and emotional projections, sniffed the liquid cautiously before taking the small sip. Her face brightened, and a wave of pleasure washed over James. He'd grown somewhat used to her empathic broadcasts, though they still caught him off guard sometimes. It was like having a second set of emotions layered over his own. "Good?" he asked, pointing to the tea. Rose nodded, a gesture she'd picked up from him. Her pale blue skin had regained some of its luster since her rescue, and she'd stopped shivering constantly. The ship's environmental controls were now set slightly warmer than James preferred, but he didn't mind. She touched the crystal pendant around her neck, something she did often, and then pointed to the tea. A series of images flashed through James's mind. Gardens, flowers, people gathering to share drinks similar to tea. "Your people had something like this?" he asked, miming drinking. More images flooded his mind. A peaceful world, beautiful architecture, crowds of blue-skinned people sharing meals and music. Then darkness, explosions, terror. Rose's hands trembled, spilling a few drops of tea. "Hey, it's okay," James said softly. He'd learned to project calm thoughts when she grew distressed. "You're safe here." Rose set down her cup and made a series of gestures they'd worked out. "Thank you. Kind human asterisk." James smiled. Her grasp of basic English words was improving, though she communicated more easily through emotions and images. He pulled out the tablet they'd been using for language lessons. "Let's try something new," he said, bringing up a simple language program. He pointed to himself. "Human. Human," Rose repeated carefully, her accent making the word musical. "And you are?" He gestured to her. "Isiri," she said. A wave of sadness accompanied the word. James nodded. They'd established this before. The name of her species. He pointed to various objects around the galley, naming them in English while she shared their Isiri names through emotional impressions and careful pronunciation. As they worked, James noticed Rose watching him intently. She reached out, her slender fingers hovering near his temple. He nodded permission. They'd done this before. The connection was stronger this time. He saw flashes of his ship through her eyes, felt her curiosity about human technology. The Star Wanderer was primitive compared to what her people had built, but she found its rugged functionality fascinating. More impressions followed. Her surprise at learning humans worked alone, her gradual understanding that James chose solitude rather than being forced into it. She showed him images of Isiri living in large, harmonious groups, always connected through their empathic abilities. "Must be lonely now," James said quietly. Rose withdrew her hand, but not before James felt her response. Less lonely here. She stood up, moving with the grace that seemed natural to her species, and walked to the galley's viewport. James followed. They stood together, watching the stars streak by. Rose pointed to the crystal pendant, then held it out for James to see. Images formed in his mind. Libraries, museums, concerts, schools. He understood. It was some kind of cultural archive. "Your civilization," he said. "All saved in there." She nodded, tears gleaming in her violet eyes. But this time, the sadness was mixed with determination. She had a purpose now, to preserve what remained of her people's legacy. James felt a protective surge. He might be just a salvage operator, but he could help her. Should help her. Whatever had destroyed her world might still be out there, hunting for survivors. Rose touched his arm lightly, sharing a feeling of gratitude mixed with concern. She understood the risks he was taking by helping her. "Don't worry about it," he said, gently patting her hand. "That's what humans do. We help people who need it." She smiled, and for the first time since he'd found her, James felt pure happiness radiating from her. It filled the small galley, making the stars outside seem brighter somehow. Neither of them knew it yet, but that moment of shared understanding would prove crucial in the days ahead. James ran a calloused hand through his graying hair as he studied the sensor readings on his salvage ship's main screen. The Star Wanderer had been drifting through this sector for 3 days without finding anything worth collecting. Supply ships used this route regularly, but debris fields were becoming scarce. "Computer, expand scan range to maximum," he commanded, taking a sip from his coffee mug. The bitter liquid had gone cold hours ago, but he barely noticed. The screen flickered, showing a wider view of the surrounding space. Something small appeared at the edge of the scan, tumbling slowly through the void. James leaned forward, squinting at the readout. "Magnify that object," he ordered. The image zoomed in, revealing what appeared to be an escape pod of unknown design. His pulse quickened. Unknown technology could mean a profitable salvage run. The Star Wanderer changed course, its engines humming as James guided it closer to the mysterious pod. As he approached, more details became clear. The pod's hull showed signs of damage, and its systems appeared to be offline. "Life signs scan," James muttered, more out of habit than expectation. Most escape pods he found were empty, tragic remnants of space accidents or pirate attacks. The computer beeped. One life sign detected. Weak but present. James sat up straight, spilling his cold coffee. Someone was alive in there. After checking the pod's drift pattern, he estimated it had been floating for at least 2 weeks. "Deploy magnetic clamps," he ordered, maneuvering his ship into position. The Star Wanderer shuddered as the clamps locked onto the pod's hull. James grabbed his emergency medkit and headed for the airlock. The space between ships was short, but James moved carefully in his suit. As he reached the pod, his helmet lights illuminated the strange symbols etched into its surface. Definitely not human design. The pod's external access panel was easy enough to find. James connected his universal bypass device, a slightly illegal tool that had saved more than one life during his salvage runs. The airlock cycled open with a hiss of escaping air. Inside, illuminated by his suit lights, he found her. The alien woman floated unconscious in her harness, her pale blue skin almost translucent in the harsh light. Long white hair drifted around her face like a halo. She wore what looked like ceremonial robes, now frost-covered in the pod's freezing interior. "Hey," James called softly, though he knew she couldn't hear him through his helmet. He reached out to check her pulse, finding it weak but steady at her neck. Her skin was ice-cold. Moving quickly, he unclipped her harness and gathered her in his arms. She was lighter than he expected, even in zero gravity. A crystal pendant floated on a chain around her neck, catching the light. Back aboard the Star Wanderer James carried her to the small medical bay. The ship's artificial gravity made her weight more noticeable, but he managed. As he laid her on the examination table, her eyelids fluttered. "You're safe," he said, though he wasn't sure she could understand. "I'm going to help you." Her eyes opened fully, solid violet with no pupils. Unlike anything he'd seen before. She gasped, trying to sit up, then fell back weakly. James grabbed a thermal blanket, wrapping it around her shoulders. She stared at him, her expression a mix of fear and confusion. Then she reached out, her cold fingers touching his forehead. A wave of emotions crashed through his mind. Fear, gratitude, desperation. James staggered back, catching himself on a nearby cabinet. She was telepathic or empathic, or something else he didn't understand. The alien woman tried to speak, but her words were unlike any language James had ever heard. She clutched the crystal around her neck, tears forming in her strange eyes. "It's okay," James said, holding up his hands in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace. "You're safe here. I'm not going to hurt you." She seemed to understand his tone, if not his words. Her shoulders relaxed slightly, though fear still showed on her face. James opened the ship's med kit, taking out a nutrient pack designed for unknown species. It wasn't much, but it would help keep her alive until he could get her proper help. As he worked, he wondered what sequence of events had brought this mysterious woman to his small corner of space, and what kind of trouble might be following her. The escape pod's warning lights bathed the cramped interior in an eerie red glow. Rose pressed her slender fingers against the cold viewport, watching her dying world grow smaller in the distance. Her pale blue skin reflected the emergency lights as tears rolled down her cheeks. She was the last of her kind now. The Reapers had made sure of that. The pod shuddered violently as another piece of debris struck its hull. Rose grabbed the safety harness, her heart pounding against her chest. The computer's monotone voice filled the cabin. Warning: hull integrity at 60%. Recommend immediate course correction. But there was nowhere to go. Her people, the Asiri, had never been warriors or explorers. Their small fleet of research vessels had been destroyed in the first wave of the attack. This escape pod, designed for short-range emergencies, was now her only hope of survival. Rose closed her eyes, reaching out with her species' natural empathic abilities. Where once she had felt the warm presence of millions of her kind, there was now only a cold, empty void. The silence in her mind was deafening. Warning: life support systems compromised. Oxygen levels declining. She pulled up the pod's navigation display, her hands trembling. The small screen showed nothing but unknown space ahead. The Asiri had mapped only a tiny fraction of this sector, focusing instead on art, music, and the pursuit of inner peace. That peaceful nature had made them easy prey. The pod lurched again, more violently this time. A new alarm joined the chorus of warnings, its high-pitched wail making Rose wince. She tried to access the damage control systems, but the screen flickered and died. Critical damage detected. Main power failing. Emergency protocols engage. The escape pod's interior grew colder as the environmental systems began to shut down. Rose hugged herself, her thin ceremonial robe offering little protection against the chill. She hadn't had time to change when the attack began. When the sky turned black with Reaper ships and the peaceful evening erupted into chaos. Through the viewport, she watched as distant stars blurred into streaks of light. The pod's emergency thrust had activated, sending her tumbling deeper into unknown space. Each random course correction took her further from the destruction behind her, but also further from any hope of rescue. Rose touched the cultural archive crystal hanging from her neck, the last record of her people's achievements, their art, their music, their philosophy. Everything they had been, everything they had created, now existed only in this small crystal and in her memories. Warning: fuel reserves at critical levels. Prepare for total system shutdown. The pod's gentle hum began to fade. Rose felt the artificial gravity fluctuate, making her stomach lurch. The emergency lights dimmed, leaving only the stark brilliance of distant stars to illuminate the cabin. She thought about her family, about her young sister who had pushed her toward the escape pod while holding back the Reaper boarding party, about her parents who had died trying to protect their cultural archives, about her people who had refused to build weapons even when they knew the danger was coming. Final warning: life support failure imminent. Please seek immediate assistance. Rose almost laughed at that. Seek assistance. In this empty part of space, the closest known civilization was light years away, and she had no way to contact them. The pod's communication system had been damaged in the initial escape. The artificial gravity failed completely. Rose floated in her harness, watching her long white hair drift around her face. The temperature continued to drop. Her breath formed small clouds in the increasingly thin air. This, then, was how it would end. Not in the quick violence of the Reaper attack, but slowly, quietly, in the cold embrace of space. She would be the last of the Asiri to die, taking with her the last living memory of her people's ways. Sleep mode engage. All non-essential systems shutting down. As darkness crept into the edges of her vision, Rose sent out one final empathic plea into the void. She didn't expect an answer. There had never been one before. But it was part of who she was, who her people had been, to reach out even at the end. She closed her eyes, waiting for the inevitable. unaware that her pod was drifting into a sector of space frequently traveled by human salvage ships.